What happened to captured German girls in the Soviet Union? Although German women did not take an active part in the fighting of World War II, some of them did end up in Soviet captivity. One such story is the fate of Frida Helinsky from the Pomeranian town of Dolis. At the age of 19, she was captured by the Soviets and spent 4 long years in prisoner-of-war camps. Her memoirs are a rare account of the plight of German women in Soviet captivity. The road to the camp was long and grueling. The prisoners were carried in overcrowded freight cars, not adapted for the transportation of people. The food was meager, mostly breadcrumbs. At the stations, the bodies of the dead were often taken out. Arriving at the camp, Frida and the other women prisoners of war were confronted with appalling conditions. Cold, dilapidated barracks, sleeping on hard bunks, lack of basic amenities. This is what awaited them in their new place. But the hardest test was the grueling work, which had to be done for 9 hours a day. Women worked on the construction of the dam, logging, in the mines and at the plant for the production of bentonite clay. Hard physical labor in harsh conditions sapped their already weak strength. The harsh conditions of captivity did not do women any favors. Frida Helinsky recalls how they performed hard physical work on an equal footing with the men. They carried heavy sacks, buckets, and stretchers. Looking back, she is surprised at her survival rate, because many stronger girls could not withstand the hardships of captivity, dying from exhausting labor and disease. The situation was aggravated by the lack of communication with relatives. During the first years of captivity, correspondence with Germany was completely forbidden. Only in 1947, the liberation of prisoners began, starting with sick women incapable of hard labor. Frida only managed to return home at the end of 1949, shortly before the new decade. Despite the harsh conditions, the captured German women maintained their fortitude. According to eyewitnesses' recollections, they went to work with songs. Leonid Dudenkov, a resident of Padozero, tells about the arrival of German prisoners to Karelia in April 1945. They worked at logging and road construction. According to him, the women arrived in an extremely exhausted state after a long and arduous journey. Their physical condition was aggravated by inadequate nutrition, both on the road and in the last months of the war back home. Leonid Dudenkov, 17, who had recently graduated from a course for roadmasters, was assigned to lead a crew of captured Germans on the construction of the road. He recalls how hard it was for them to excavate and grub stumps. Although Dudenkov was not aware of the living conditions in the camp, he notes that the treatment of the prisoners was quite humane. The initial exhaustion soon passed, and the women even began to sing on their way to work. Youth takes its toll, Leonid says. Despite everything, they wanted to live and be happy. He recalls how the German women sang. They sang freely. No one forbade them, he adds. Dudenkov notes that cases of illness and death among German prisoners were typical only for the first months of their stay in the camp. Those who survived this period managed to adapt and looked quite healthy. I do not believe that the camp was the cause of the deaths, he concludes. They did come to us exhausted, sick, and very weak. Security for the captured Germans in Karelia was relatively loose. Despite the presence of 3 rows of barbed wire, it could be overcome if desired. However, escape was pointless because of the surrounding forests. By midsummer, the women were even allowed to go outside the camp to pick berries and mushrooms. The Germans worked with characteristic German conscientiousness without imitation of activity. However, their forced labor proved to be economically inefficient. The management concluded that the cost of keeping the prisoners was barely covered by their output, which led to the decision to disband the camp. Repatriation began in the fall of 1945. Olimpiada Suslova, who accompanied the prisoners, recalls that they were transported in soldiers' teplushki with a separate food car and a field kitchen for cooking hot food. The women were taken to Frankfurt am Oder and handed over to the local authorities, which caused great joy among the returnees. By the end of 1945, the remaining 94 women were also sent to Germany. Most of the POWs who worked in Karelia were from East Prussia. Perhaps this was some kind of experiment that was recognized as a failure. Although the conditions of detention of the Germans in the USSR could hardly be called ideal, they differed strikingly for the better from the treatment of prisoners by Nazi Germany.